Good evening and welcome to Northbeat. I'm Leanie Lambrink. The NWT's capital budget could be in jeopardy. Regular MLAs said today they will not support it because it doesn't align with the priorities of the Assembly. All of the regular MLAs sit on the Accountability and Oversight Committee. Today, Inuvik Boot Lake MLA Denny Rogers presented a report to the House from that committee. It says if healthcare and housing are not prioritized in the capital budget, the regular MLAs will vote against it.
It is not lost on committee the gravity of the position that we have taken, and would reiterate that we are urgently seeking a course correction from government with appropriate resourcing behind it that reflects both the Assembly priorities and the concerns of NWT residents. Committee is very concerned about the fragility of our healthcare system and the apparent inability to put appropriate resources into housing. Committee remains dedicated to fostering a transparent and collaborative budget process. It has become clear to us that failing to fix these problems is undermining our ability to practice responsible fiscal management and puts our goals in jeopardy, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we believe that by putting appropriate focus on our shared priorities, we can achieve a more prosperous and resilient future for all. We look forward to continuing this vital conversation and hope that we'll see the appropriate shift during this government session. Committee understand that the capital budget is before us. However, we cannot approve the budget until we see real commitments for change and a shift in government resources that better reflects the priorities of this Assembly. This report is presented to the House as a demonstration of committee's ongoing commitment to transparency alongside a continued call for action to better and more immediately address the priorities of the 20th Legislative Assembly. Mr. Speaker, in recent discussions, it has become clear that the government's mechanisms to address the serious issues that have arisen in housing and health and social services are falling short of what is necessary to make meaningful change. As we navigate the complexities of our fiscal and policy landscape, we're reminded that it is imperative that we as a government make informed decisions that reflect the needs and values of our communities and residents. We are becoming increasingly concerned that those needs and values are not being addressed meaningfully, so we are prepared to take a strong position to urge the government to act right away.
This Assembly laid out only 4 priorities, which included access to health care and the suitability, accessibility, and affordability of housing. As it is currently written, the capital budget sets aside $11.3 million for housing. That is just 3% of the entire budget. Turning to federal politics, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is under more pressure than ever before to step down, and it's coming from inside his own party. Now, those trying to oust Trudeau have given him an ultimatum. Ashley Burke reports.
The party is strong and united.
The party may be united, but not necessarily behind its current leader.
We need change, but
Liberal MP Wayne Long among those calling on Justin Trudeau to step down.
Liberal Party is an institution in this country. It's bigger than one person, one leader.
He's among 24 Liberal MPs who sources say signed a letter calling on Trudeau to go. And that today an MP read out a document at caucus that says Trudeau has until Monday to decide if he'll leave.
Do you think the Prime Minister should stay?
It's not up to me. It's up to him.
The Prime Minister will make a decision, and he will, whatever the decision is, we will stand behind him.
During that private meeting, Liberal MPs say as many as 20 of their colleagues voiced concerns about the Prime Minister, while others stood behind him.
We heard a lot. Over, I'd say 50 or so people spoke. We heard every angle, every aspect of this. And what it's left us with is something to go away and think about.
Liberal MPs told CBC News the Prime Minister listened and said he would reflect on what caucus told him. But Trudeau told his MPs he wasn't convinced he had to go.
He's quite clear about his intentions, and I don't expect those to change.
My colleagues need to turn the knives outwards and not inwards, and we need to focus on the most important thing, which is getting things done here in Parliament and taking the fight to Pierre Poilievre, because he's a disaster for this country.
The Conservatives seizing on the Liberal division as ammunition against Trudeau.
His caucus is revolting. Will he call a carbon tax election today?
Once Trudeau tells his MPs what he's deciding to do, those trying to oust him will decide how they're going to respond. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Ottawa.
Is Iqaluit Airport equipped to respond to emergencies? That's the question after a bomb scare on an Air India plane last week. It left 211 passengers stranded in Iqaluit for nearly a day. Eventually, the federal government stepped in. Samuel Watt has more.
When you've got passengers stranded in a foreign place, one would expect the airline to send a replacement flight.
In this instance, it didn't occur, and it's frustrating.
That's John Hawkins, Nunavut's Assistant Deputy Minister of Transportation. He says Iqaluit Airport was able to cater to the volume of passengers on the Air India plane, but doing so for 18 hours is pushing the limit.
There's a difference between being able to safely accommodate and comfortably accommodate, and we can safely accommodate.
The Canadian Air Force ended up escorting those passengers out. In the future, Hawkins says they'll be more insistent on the airline to be responsible to their customers. But they'll also have backup plans to keep people comfortable, things like emergency beds for a longer stay. As for bomb threats, Hawkins says it's something emergency services do talk about. There aren't explosives teams in the territory though, but one civil aviation expert in Montreal doesn't believe that's needed.
How many times has a plane on bomb alert been forced to land there? To my knowledge, there were no others.
Iqaluit Airport has a 2.6 kilometre long runway, enough distance, he says, for a plane with a potential bomb to be parked away from people. But he hopes it doesn't come to that. Samuel Watt, CBC News, Iqaluit.
This week marks the end of Air Greenland's direct route between Nuuk and Iqaluit for the year. According to the airline, approximately 70% of the seats were booked for this season. That's more than expected. Carl Cardinal has more.
From June to October, Air Greenland operated a scheduled flight once a week. According to the airline, the route was successful and it is already renewed for a second year. Jacob Nitter Sorensen is the CEO of Air Greenland. He says the route opened up many opportunities for both regions.
Definitely a market within the mineral sector, also for tourism, also for government officials, culture, music, sports. And for this summer, it has been also people who we didn't really expect to come here, who basically just saw, okay, now there's an opportunity, we'll just go visit Greenland.
The flight path made possible new initiatives, like Sheila Ulayu, who lives in Iqaluit. She has been invited to do a kamek making workshop in Nuuk. She says the direct flight brought opportunities to exchange traditional knowledge.
They have their way of making their own pair of kamek that is different from how we do things. But I know it is reclaiming back what they almost lost, and reclaiming your identity as an Innu.
The direct connection is the first in 10 years. More than 60% of this year's passengers were Canadian. The route opens again from April to October 2025. Carl Cardinal, CBC News, Iqaluit.
Many residents of Norman Wells NWT are asking why Imperial Oil didn't bring in more fuel on the winter road last season. For weeks, people have been paying extremely high prices for fuel delivered by plane. Now the company is giving some answers. Sarah Krymolowski has more.
More than usual, but still far from enough. That's how much fuel Imperial Oil moved to Norman Wells on the winter road last year. Late last Friday, the company sent a letter to Norman Wells Town Council. They wrote that they brought in about a third of the fuel they thought they would need for the year on the winter road, whereas normally almost everything goes by barge. But most businesses in town didn't gamble on the barges. They shipped what they needed on the road. They say that if Imperial Oil had followed suit, fuel prices would be much cheaper now. As for why Imperial Oil didn't make better use of the winter road, the company said barging is cheaper than trucking in fuel for everyone, and they didn't know for sure if barges would be canceled until May. Frank Pope is Norman Wells' mayor. He isn't very impressed with the argument.
We know for sure last fall there were going to be no barges this summer. We were prepared, they were not.
Pope is calling on Imperial to cover the full cost of air freight. Sarah Krymolowski, CBC News, Yellowknife.
And the wait for winter roads and ice crossings is about to really get underway in the NWT. Ferries are getting ready to shut down for the season. Both the Nduli Ferry crossing at Wrigley and Liard River Ferry are on closure notices. They could shut down for the season sometime in the next 72 hours. After that, communities will be cut off until ice crossings can be built. And birthing services in Inuvik NWT will continue to be sporadic until at least mid-January. The NWT Health and Social Services Authority says there will be no labor and delivery services in the town until November 3rd. They will be reinstated temporarily until December 5th. Then they'll be stopped again until at least January 11th. It's been months since the Inuvik Regional Hospital has had consistent full-time birthing services. The territory says it's because there isn't enough qualified nursing staff. Patients who had been expecting to give birth at the Inuvik Regional Hospital will be transferred to Stanton Territorial Hospital in Yellowknife. A federal standing committee will investigate whether the soil and water near a dock used by 3 northern Alberta Indigenous communities is contaminated.
Seems like a very clear example of environmental racism. And so hearing those calls to action from the nations and from the community, I wanted to make sure that this is brought into the light, that we can hold the ministers responsible for their inaction.
Earlier this month, leaders of the Athabasca Chippewan First Nation, Mikisew Cree First Nation, and Fort Chippewan Métis Nation released a joint statement. They are accusing the federal government of hiding a 2017 Transport Canada report that outlined the contaminants found in the soil near the dock on Lake Athabasca.
This is a proposed corridor for multiple pipeline projects.
You're crossing our territory on 2 ends of your pipeline. Who gave you permission?
Pipelines break of the pipelines would destroy the water and everything in it.
They got to come through us first.
Is this an immediate evacuation order for all Coastal GasLink employees? I feel like we are at war. It's just all been building up to this point.
Yenta on The Passionate Eye. Watch free on CBC Gem.
Release him.
Why?
Well, I would say it's extremely bad form to arrest your new boss.
This man is actually in my custody.
What did he do?
Well,
Did you hear that? I'm being charged with,
this ranch isn't going down. Not on my watch.
The dirty underbelly of capitalism is exploitation.
They're making more money than they have ever made in the history of the music business.
We have generation after generation of us not seeing a fair piece of the pie.
How do we keep the money from Black music in Black people's hands?
Never got paid, never got their due, never got their acknowledgement, never got their awards, never got their flowers.
Don't miss Paid in Full, a 3-part series. Watch free on CBC Gem.
If the car comes with the deal, I'm in.
Cheers, Dragons!
I look forward to fighting you on many a deal.
And we look forward to beating you.
Dragon's Den. Watch free on CBC Gem.
The question is,
And I'm just going to ask, I want to ask you, but
why is this such a big deal? What does the science say?
what was their reaction?
What are we talking about here?
Who told you?
So, to be clear, what is the actual story there?
I think we can explain.
Ross River, Yukon got a special visit this week. Former NHL player Jordan Tutu was in town to meet with local students. Ross River has been coping with the deaths of 2 youth in the community this past year. Tutu lost his own brother to suicide. He says visiting communities like Ross River is a chance to remind northern youth that it's possible to bounce back from trauma and loss.
Having gone through a lot of grief in my family, I am truly grateful that I'm able to share my story and help other communities out. A lot of these remote communities, they need the support. They need real life stories of one of their own. And for me to be able to share my journey and my experiences and showing them that there is hope.
Tutu was the first Inuk drafter to play in the NHL. He played more than 700 games with Nashville, Detroit, New Jersey, and Chicago. A Brent goose that was hunted in Resolute this summer is part of an animated documentary about the animal's migration patterns. The doc features kids in a school in Ireland who tracked some of the geese. Kendrew Cahoon is an ecologist who studies the species. He says he was amused when he first found out because even though it's rare, it has happened before.
There was, you see, a villager called, who I hope is still alive, Paul Amagolak in Resolute in around 2005, so nearly 20 years ago. A very similar story happened. That goose actually had a satellite transmitter on its back. The Canadian team were at Resolute going out to work on brant or other species in the islands further north, and they got beeps. Genuinely, they got beeps on a handset that said, the goose is in the town, it shouldn't be in the town. And they tracked the goose down, and it was outside Paul's house, and Paul had gone from Resolute to Bathurst hunting, and he'd shot a goose with a transmitter on it.
Cahoon says he understands that some Nunavummiut rely on hunting as a food source. The documentary is split into 13 parts and can be streamed online. Police in Halifax are investigating a troubling incident from over the weekend. A young woman who worked in a local Walmart was found dead inside the store's bakery oven. Here's Kayla Hounsell with what we know so far.
A growing memorial for a young woman found dead inside this Halifax Walmart where she worked. She was just 19. Shockingly found inside an industrial oven in the bakery, large enough for a person to step inside.
This investigation is a very complex investigation.
Police say they were called here around 9:30 Saturday night to investigate a sudden death. They have not said whether it's believed to be criminal. Sources tell CBC News the oven does not lock. Police say the woman had been working that day. They have not released her name.
We're working with occupational health and safety, Nova Scotia medical examiners, determine the cause and manner of death.
A Walmart spokesperson says, "We are heartbroken and our deepest thoughts are with our associate and their family. We extend our sincerest condolences to those who were closest to them." The store has been closed ever since and grief counseling made available for employees. Members of the maritime Sikh community say the woman was originally from India and came to Canada 2 or 3 years ago.
It's pretty distressing that young people come here with all kind of hopes and dreams, and they are working hard, and then this is what happens.
In Halifax, rumors have been spreading online, prompting police to urge the public not to speculate, warning the investigation could take a significant amount of time.
We want to make sure that they consider the family and the co-workers.
The Nova Scotia Department of Labour says it has issued a stop work order for the bakery and one piece of equipment at this Walmart. Police have cleared the scene here but say their investigation is ongoing. Kayla Hounsell, CBC News, Halifax.
The Bank of Canada is dropping its trend-setting interest rate again. The central bank went big this time, cutting it by 0.5 percentage point rather than the usual 1/4 point. It's welcome news for anyone with a variable rate mortgage, but the experts are watching other economic issues too. The CBC's Anis Haidari has more.
The Bank of Canada is picking up the pace, making a big cut to its key rate.
We took a bigger step today because inflation is now back to the 2% target, and we want to keep it close to the target.
The central bank's interest rate down by 0.5 percentage point to 3.75%, attempting to ensure the economy doesn't cool off too much.
We need demand to strengthen, take up the slack.
For one thing, lower interest rates can make mortgages cheaper, freeing up money to spend elsewhere.
I've seen a drop of around $200, $300 monthly, which adds up to my budget, and I'm able to allocate money wherein I would previously think twice.
But high rates affect more than just mortgages.
So I believe if interest rates don't go back to sustainable levels, we're going to struggle in the long run.
We're not even at neutral.
Some economists say the Bank of Canada needed to move faster.
And clearly, the softening in labor market is probably a big surprise to them. The speed at which it has softened, but also the speed at which inflation has come down.
And saying they should have cut more before the U.S. election, because Americans can drastically affect Canada's economy too.
What happens in the U.S. will be a primary driver on whether or not we slow down more than what's expected in the Bank of Canada's forecast in 2025.
With economic growth already slow, the central bank will be watching how Canadians and Canadian businesses start spending before making their next decision in early December. Anis Haydari, CBC News, Calgary.
Canada's Sports Hall of Fame got 9 new members today, including 5 Olympians. Each inductee is said to have contributed to Canadian sport through their innovation, advocacy, or expertise. The CBC's Devin Haru walks us through who they are.
A remarkable morning here at the Canadian Museum of History as we celebrate the 2024 class going into Canada's Sports Hall of Fame. 9 new members. Superstars on hand. Let's talk about the women's hockey pioneer, Vicky Sanahara, a long career, nearly 2 decades. She won 2 Olympic gold medals and a silver, so many world championships. She's going into the hall. So too is Patrick Chan, the prolific figure skater, wowing audiences for years. He won a number of Olympic medals and world championship titles and national titles. And let's not forget about tennis doubles superstar Daniel Nestor, 1,062 victories in his career in doubles, slam titles, and a 2000 Olympic gold medal. Indigenous sprinter, runner, Angela Chalmers. She was the first Indigenous woman from Canada to win an Olympic medal, bronze in Barcelona. Debbie Brill, a high jumper. She had the Brill Bend named after her. And Kirby Cote, a Paralympic swimmer, 13 medals in her career. They're all going into the hall. On the builder side of things, Alec Nelson, a residential school survivor. He uses sport for reconciliation. He talked about that here today. And Guylaine Demers, a professor. She has studied inequity in sport, finding space for girls and women to play the game they love. And finally, let's talk about Fred Thomas. He died in 1981, a life cut far too short, but in his 57 years, he broke color barriers. He was the first black man ever to play in the CFL, and his family was here, so proud to honor him. This is the best of Canada on hand, and they're taking their rightful place in Canada's Sports Hall of Fame. For CBC Sports, in Gatineau, Quebec, I'm Devin Haru.
And a story now that's fitting for the spooky season. There are monsters who lurk from the rooftops and dark corners of Parliament Hill. The haunting figures of the gargoyles and grotesques who ward off evil spirits and guard the buildings. A number of the misshapen characters are undergoing facelifts thanks to the Centre Block Restoration Project, a major undertaking that is overhauling Canada's historic seat of government. Sandra Abma went to take a look.
The tap, tap, tap of mallet and chisel is a constant sound at this outdoor workshop set up just beside the Supreme Court building. Skilled stone carvers practice an ancient craft, paying meticulous attention and care to the creations they are coaxing back to life, restoring and remaking the monstrous figures that populate the center block.
This is a bison that was recreated
under the watchful eye of Dominion sculptor John Philip Smith.
The site would have kind of sounded like and felt like at the time of the construction, so it's kind of like stepping back in time a little bit. They do use air hammers a fair bit, but always when it comes back to that final touch, that final pass, it's really important to show that aesthetic and that texture of the chisels as they were originally used on the Parliament buildings.
The neo-Gothic grotesques and gargoyles of Parliament Hill were originally crafted in the late 18 and early 1900s. but most of the original sculptures were destroyed in the Great Fire of 1916. A major rebuild followed that added the giant granite grotesques that peer down from the Peace Tower. Decades of weather, wind, rain, and storms have damaged these works of imagination.
This was completely missing. We believe that this was a lot of wind erosion, the wind getting in some of these little nooks and crannies and kind of spinning about and just kind of wearing away at the piece.
This latest restoration is known as the Pipe Man.
There's a shoe here that's pointing up, a hand with some fingers and the hand holding the pipe, and then there's another boot that's pointing the other way. So really, the legs are quite distorted, tangled up. They're kind of going up and over the arm. So some kind of advanced yoga pose.
While the center block restoration won't be completed for some time, a new visitors center is slated to open next year, where these characters will be waiting to greet you. Sandra Abma, CBC News, Ottawa.
That is Northbeat for tonight. For news anytime, head to cbc.ca/north. Thanks for watching. I'm Leanie Lambrink. Have a great evening.
Which insects are serially monogamous?
I'm just curious.
Can love help us live longer?
I feel alive.
Does heartbreak make music better?
I love this music.
Could AI compose the next masterpiece of our time?
Robot composers conducting robot music.
Do you really need to wait 30 minutes after eating before swimming? And why is something as big as time kept in something as small as a watch?
Whoa, that's heavy.
When you get curious, you get CBC.
Oh, wait, are we allowed to touch, like, no, it's fine, yeah.
In Australia, a unique experiment
How come you guys don't have a table? We do have a table.
is about to unfold. A school swap that brings together 12 students from very different cultures and religions.
You do what you want to do, it's fine, I'll do me.
My fear is, instead of building bridges, they'll end up blowing them.
I want to be seen as me and not my hijab, not scary terrorists or something like that.
They're making more money than they have ever made in the history of the music business.
We have generation after generation of us not seeing a fair piece of the pie.
How do we keep the money from Black music in Black people's hands?
You're going to be introduced to a new world. Stand back.
I think my dislike is warranted.
What was Amy calling it? The beef wars?
You don't tell me anything. You don't share your feelings, open up about your past.
It's not that simple, Amy.
Heart is pounding. This is very hard to do.
We both know it's not an easy task.
The Great Canadian Baking Show. Watch free on CBC Gem.
Q with Tom Power. Available now on CBC Listen or wherever you get your podcasts.